Facebook. And if you get my headphones, would you mind, just in case I need them? It should be right in there. Okay, we're just counting down here. There we go. I can see us on Facebook, so we're all set.
Aren't you an amazing techie?
You are.
Well, don't say that yet.
Listen, I'm already impressed.
Okay, so that's all. All right, just gonna check things. Welcome everybody as you're coming online. Let us know where you're coming from.
Rebecca, you see the owl in the back?
Yes.
That was the one that Fidel gave me when we were in Cuba.
No. Oh gosh, doesn't that seem like a long time ago? I remember it's such a lovely gift, and it's like,
I know, so it feels like years, doesn't it?
that's nice. Have you heard anything about him?
No.
Last talk we had,
I've heard from Yana, but I haven't heard from Fidel. But I'll send her a message and ask her if she can check up on him and let us know.
Yeah.
Okay, I think all the technology is working. So we're going to get started, and right now we're doing this on Zoom, and then we're also broadcasting live onto Facebook, and we're hoping all the technology is going to work. My name's Carolyn Ray, and I'm the publisher of JourneyWoman, and I'm really excited to be here with you talking about something that is the topic of our daily conversations all the time, which is COVID-19. We're all kind of in the same position. We're seeking answers. We're trying to learn together. And a few weeks ago, I reached out to a group of travel writers and asked them if they would be willing to share their thoughts and expert advice with us on what they thought would change in terms of travel. And so tonight we have 3 of those experts with us. And I'll just take a moment and introduce them in a second. I just want to mention that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll be answering them throughout, but we're going to start off with a few prepared questions, and then we'll see how things go. And let us know if you have any trouble hearing or anything at all, and we'll try to correct that as we go along. So let me introduce the women that have made time to be with us this evening. And again, thank you to all of you for joining us. Carol Patterson, who's in the turquoise, is a contributor to National Geographic, BBC Travel, Fodor's Travel, The Daily Beast, Canadian Geographic, and she's the author of several books, The Business of Ecotourism and Sustainable Tourism, Business Development, Operations and Management. She's also was also a teacher at the University of Calgary teaching adventure tourism. And Carol is somebody that I got in touch with when I was rethinking the JourneyWoman brand and ethos, and was very helpful to me when I was thinking about the concept of authentic travel and what that could mean for our community. Nancy Drolet is in the brown, and I think in the upper, I feel like we're on Hollywood Squares a little bit here, but in the upper box. And I met Nancy a few weeks ago. We were in Cuba together on a trip, and she works with Jesson and Company Communications, which is a PR firm based here in Toronto. She was formerly with the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and she's got a long history working with tour operators, tourism boards, and other key stakeholders. I was just blown away by Nancy and how knowledgeable she was about every part of travel and tourism. So I thought she would be a great resource to have on this panel tonight. And in talking to her, I think she knows every possible destination in the Caribbean, every place to have a mojito, best bars, best beaches. So she really is an expert on many, many things. So thank you, Nancy.
Welcome.
And
Thanks
Rebecca Field Jager is an incredibly talented journalist who I also met a few weeks ago. And she writes for a number of publications, including Zoomer, the National Post, Canadian Traveler. She's got a great sense of humor, and I think you'll find her perspective really refreshing and enjoyable, as I did when we met. And she travels extensively, and she also writes about solo, multi-generational, and mother-daughter travel. And I also discovered an article she'd written about road trips and finding romance on the road. So maybe she can be our expert on that tonight.
I don't know.
So we're very lucky to have these three women with us here today, talking about the future and thinking about travel. I know that there are a lot of questions that have been coming in today. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. There might be some questions that we don't feel qualified to answer, and we'll certainly tell you that, but we'll certainly do our best. We really are in uncharted territory here. We thought we'd start off this session talking a bit about COVID-19 and the experience that we've all had individually with it. We know that the timing of any travel will be determined both by a vaccine and by a therapy. So we kind of have the pre-vaccine world, which we're living in now, and the post-vaccine or post-therapy world, in which we'll feel a lot more safe to travel, I think. And we know that everyone who's thinking about traveling, it probably depends a lot on not only your personal experience and how much you've traveled, but also the experience that you've had during COVID-19. So I wanted to ask each of our speakers, and maybe Carol, I'll start with you, about what has your experience been like with COVID-19 and how has it affected you?
Well, I was on a trip actually when things started to go sideways. Fortunately, it was one here in Canada where I live. But it was a sobering feeling to watch the TV and see your prime minister say, it's time to go home. It's not usually the message that I'm used to seeing as a travel writer. And, but there was no doubt in my mind that it was the right call. And so for me, I've come home, I've canceled several trips. My income has dried up to almost nothing. So it's been a time of reflection, a lot of anxiety, like I think for many people in tourism, wondering when we can go back to work, maybe not normal, but go back to work and what that's going to look like. So for me, I've been healthy. I haven't known anyone that's been affected personally by the virus at this point. And I was able to get home without any trauma or stress. So I've been one of the lucky ones.
That's good. That's good. And Nancy, what about you?
It's interesting because you wrote an article on how it felt to be out of the country and isolated, while all this was going down. In January, towards the end of January, I was actually in Nassau. And when I flew back in, that's the first time that I really felt a sense that something bigger than, what was happening over there in China, was going to affect us. And that was when we got to the point where we're at customs and immigration and we're filling out that form. And there was a warning there or, something asking us, have you been to Wuhan, China? And if you have, then, click here and then go there. When I traveled a couple of weeks later, I was in Anguilla, when I came back from Anguilla, all of a sudden there were a couple of other countries on that list. And then, of course, a couple of weeks later, there we are in Cuba, and everything's starting to happen. And as you wrote so eloquently, we were away from home. And it's a completely different perspective when you're in a foreign country and in quite an isolated area as we were. So we came home, a lot more restrictions, and I think we came in just before they started closing the borders. And I feel like we nipped it in the bud. We were far more fortunate than so many people that got stranded all over the world. And like Carol said, I think it was the right call for the government to make. Glad to be home. Certainly worried about the future of our industry, and so many friends in this industry that are, impacted by layoffs, by jobs that now no longer exist, and certainly worried about, what it's going to look like on the other end, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. And Rebecca, what about you?
Well, as you know, I was in Cuba with you and Nancy, and it started out, okay, we're here and we're going to do the trip, and it was great, and it's a wonderful, wonderful country. And then the distractions came in as the news started coming in, and as things started getting so frightening and everything at home. So for me, I have two kids, two adult children. They were both in the States. They both live in the States, one in San Francisco, the other in New York City. So this panic of would they get home? Would I go to them? How long would this isolation last? And all that really, kind of obviously marred the end of our trip. And I came home, went into the 14-day self-isolating thing and that. And just my son was able to, San Francisco locked down very quickly. And so, he got back to Toronto and began his isolation here. And then my daughter, who lives in New York City, decided that, she was going to stay put with her partner there. And they have a apartment in Brooklyn. And especially for the last few weeks, just watch a little bit of the news, but we talk all the time and all of that, and they're riding it out in true tough New York fashion. So it's been harrowing, but it has been for everyone, of course.
Yeah, it's a bit of a lesson on resilience and gratitude and all the things that we've been experiencing as we've been going on this journey together. I'm curious what you all think in terms of and we've been doing a little bit of social polling on this on Twitter and Instagram around how people will feel about traveling. Who will be the first out? Will they want to stay local? Will they want to stay in their own countries? Will they want to go internationally? And so far, what we've seen, and these are just very small polls, is that there will be a likelihood to stay in country and stay in, your local, provincial or state or what have you. But who do you think will be the first people to kind of say, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to hit it, and I'm getting on a plane or a boat or a car and going somewhere?
I think it'll be the ones that feel invincible. Perhaps the younger people who think their risk of having a serious outcome is maybe the first that will go. But I think right behind them, or at the same time, might be the people who have been separated from family and friends, who have found this very difficult to be apart. And I think also there's people, as you get to a certain age, you start to realize that your time is limited. And I think people will this is forcing all of us to look at our values and decide what's important to us. And I think the people that have decided that it's more risky to stay home and avoid missing something than it is to get out there and do it, I think will be some of the early travelers.
Nancy, what are your thoughts?
I agree in terms of, the young folk that think they are invincible. they're chomping at the bit now. We see them, doing those Google searches and, looking for destinations. They'll be looking for the specials as they come out in droves and finding, which special to take advantage of. But I agree. I think most Canadians, wherever you are in the world, you're going to go see your family first because you'll want to check on family, close friends, etc., and want to see them first. After that, it will depend on how widespread COVID still is. I think safety first. Certainly, speaking from a Canadian perspective, I think Canadians will consider their health and welfare, and they're not going to go to destinations that have been severely impacted right away. I think we want to travel to destinations where perhaps they've had a lesser amount of impact. And it will depend in terms of, what our government's going to tell us to do or allow us to do. It depends on when the borders open up and where the flights are going to go, right? That will all determine where we're going to travel to.
Yeah, and I guess the other question, which one of our guests just asked, is how, it may change how far in advance we plan travel as well, because we're not willing to take the risk of something even 6 months out,
Yeah, absolutely. Although it's interesting, I've heard from agents that have actually made bookings into next year. So, there are people that are prepared to book and travel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about all of this is that our perception of physical space and distance between people and things has been significantly altered. And I'm curious what you all think the impact of that will be on everything from, where we sit on a plane to resorts to hotels to like public spaces when we travel. How much do you think the social distancing that we're doing now is going to flow over into the way that we travel?
I think that some of the manners or respect or sort of social responsibility of travel will be reflected in that. I mean, certainly on planes, the middle seat absence, all of those kinds of things, shifting around, just like in the grocery stores, making less people in the same amount of space so that it's possible to physically distance. But I think that we'll have learned by then, or I hope that we all will have, just that respect, not to get right up behind the ticket booth of the next person, all of that, things, protocols like wearing masks and stuff like that, where you're doing it for the common good so that everyone has this as comfortable as possible an experience. I think you're going to see a lot of kindness that way, because we've kind of learned it here in our own cities, in our own homes, and we're going to want it and expect it for our own selves. But I think you'll see it as more of a community effort as well, not just protecting you, but everybody around you, for the good of everybody on the flight or the train, or stopping at the gas station because you're on some fabulous road trip, that sort of thing.
I think we might see a lot of pent-up emotion in those early months, like as people get out. I think there was some of that in China as people came out of the homes. Like, it wasn't all eureka. I mean, there was, anger and frustration that, they'd lost this time or this opportunities or work. And I think we're going to see some of that too. I mean, I've noticed, I've been out on the roads occasionally, and they caught someone traveling through the city at 8:30 in the morning at double the speed limit on the freeway, like at 8:30 in the morning. And, this is something you would have seen on a Saturday night, perhaps. And I think there's a lot of frustration that I think, or not maybe frustration, but emotion that is going to be present. And I think we will be thinking a lot about those other people, but I'm not sure it's all going to be friendly, because it could be that, this idea, if we go to a place, somebody mentioned the lower COVID-19 incidents, well, they may not want to see people from away because they perceive foreigners as having carried that into their communities. And and perhaps we want to think about where there has been the highest incidence, because maybe there's herd immunity has developed, and maybe those are the places that have been better set up. So I think it's going to be interesting. And I think the wounds from this experience are going to carry with us for a while, in terms of how we behave and how we travel. And I don't think that we're going to just leap out of our homes and have the same joyous experience on the road that we used to. And I think if you go back to looking at how some people were after World War II being in concentration camps, if you read the book by Viktor Frankl, and they talk about how they had to learn joy again because it had been taken from them. And I'm not at all comparing what we're going through to that, but I'm just saying that this is a more profound experience than just being told to stay indoors. So
a defining moment for sure. Nancy, what about your thoughts? I know you're looking at a lot of what the industry is doing and changes.
Yeah, I think, well, we certainly heard from the airline's perspective that they were seating people window aisle, skipping the middle seat, which I'm pretty sure everybody will say, yay, we didn't like those middle seats anyway. It would be great if they could take rows out so that our pitch was better on those seats, but we'll see what happens in that regard. So they're obviously seating us differently. How long that will continue into the future, don't know. It may be that people will gravitate to hotels that are not offering buffets. That may be something, that consumers will decide they don't want to go to a property that only offers buffet meals because they feel a little bit more, susceptible should there be some type of incident. I was talking with someone in the destination who was talking about, whether when people start arriving in one of the islands, will people have their temperature taken? Or will they be tested on arrival? We don't know what protocols will be put in place. What kinds of cleaning protocols will hotels be required to follow? What will cruise lines be, interested in following? We're hearing some rumblings, from crews whether or not they're going to change their ventilation system. So there can be tremendous, changes in the future to make it better for everyone and safer for everyone to travel.
Yeah, and certainly cleanliness, safety, I think now is being redefined a bit. It used to be about physical safety, and now we have a much broader definition of what does safety mean, because we're talking about hygiene and cleanliness and all these other things that, frankly, we probably didn't think about too much. And we, thought maybe we were resistant. I'd like to think I have a strong immune system from travel, but maybe that's overreaching a little bit now. Do you think, I'm interested in and from a destination perspective, if you think there are certain destinations that will be chosen over others, and Carol, you mentioned this a little bit in terms of herd immunity, do you think that some destinations will be viewed as less safe or less, appealing than they might be now?
Possibly, but I mean, we will all have experienced it. So I don't think there'll be any place in the world untouched. I think initially we won't have the choice of all destinations. Like, I don't think all borders will come down as quickly as people want to travel. So I think you may be choosing from destinations that you can go to, not necessarily your first choice. And I think you might see some substitution, people who maybe wanted to go to a warmer destination, go to Canada's West Coast, say if they're Canadian, or something like that, where sort of a substitution goes into place. But I think, like I say, for the people that had something on their bucket list, I think that would probably go higher up. As far as what those places are, I think it varies on, the person and what their interests are. After 9/11, one of the first things to come back was adventure tourism. People felt they were safe in the outdoors and in sparsely populated areas. And so we saw that come back quicker than in some of the more urban destinations. And I think we'll see the same thing here, where you may find people choosing to go to, say, cottages by the lake, or, renting a mountain cabin for a longer period of time. And I think, road trips where it's the journey, not necessarily where you're headed to. I think those types of travel will become important in sort of the short to medium term. And perhaps it's going to change our whole way about destinations. You know, our bucket list, that may be 2 to 3 years out before we could get back to, you know, shopping from a menu of destinations around the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about bucket lists, and because you know, it's been everyone's got a bucket list of some kind, and what do you all think? Is this the end of the bucket list? We're just going to go out and do it, or are we going to find a different way to you know, achieve that idea of going to all the places that we want to go?
I don't think bucket list travel is gone forever, but I don't think it will be right now. Because, you know, to Carol's point, those destinations may not be available to travel to, either because the government will have warnings in place so that you're unable to travel to certain destinations, or I think human nature. Canadians are probably going to want to stay closer to home. And there'll probably be a radius that you could fly around and say, you know, maybe 3, 4, 5 hours maximum. They may not want to go, you know, on a 14-hour flight, for example. So I think the bucket list will come back. It just won't come back right away. One of the things we're definitely going to see in terms of availability, you know, the tour operators have been severely impacted by this, of course. They are not going to offer routes that weren't or that are not profitable. They have to earn money. They have to start earning, you know, money. And so consequently, I do think you'll see some routes disappear. I think you'll see consolidation, you know, where you might have had, you know, 7 flights, you know, a particular country, you may see that go down to 4 or 5. That may impact price. We don't know yet. But you know, it will not allow for the full menu of destinations that one would think you would have if you wanted to travel your bucket list or create a bucket list. But I think we'll get back there. It'll just take you know, to Carol's point, I think it's going to take a couple of years.
Yeah, yeah.
I think too, bucket lists can be, we might change or broaden the definition of it. A bucket list might be, I always wanted to go on a trip with my mom. And that's the bucket list. The destination isn't. Or I always wanted to, you know, go on a train. I always wanted to travel by train, or I always wanted to rent an RV or something like that. I think some of the desires that we have will sort of, or things we always wanted to do, we might be able to switch them in a way without really knowing it, that sort of alters. It's not really the destination, it's the company or the way that you travel. It's the backpack versus the luxe, or maybe it's just a luxe experience only, you know, for 2 nights somewhere, those kinds of things. So that bucket list doesn't leave our vocabulary, but it's just kind of, it's a bigger, it encompasses more things. I think too, that if a destination is safe and is accessible, I think we're going to see some people saying, you know what, I'm not waiting. I'm going, I'm just doing it right away. That our bucket list stuff is going to be, just because it's made us so aware of just our time and our life and our, you know, and all of that. So whereas others might hold it off till the right minute, I think others will be, the bucket list people might be, getting back to an earlier question, those will be the first people going, the bucket list people, assuming of course that they happen to have a bucket list destination that they can get to.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we've had come in, which I know we have talked about, is how will this impact the cruise industry, and what changes will happen there? And we did a little mini poll today on Instagram just to see. The question was, will you be willing to get on a cruise ship again? And it was pretty much a no on that front. But Nancy, what are your thoughts in terms of the cruise sector?
Well, you know, I used to work for a cruise line, so I saw that note that you sent out, and it was like, oh, the cruise lines have a lot to fix Unfortunately, there was bad news story after bad news story after bad news story, but usually they're great corporate citizens in terms of emergencies. So we've seen them offer their facilities as floating hospitals, um, and that's great too. I think the cruise lines are smart enough that they're going to find a workaround, and they're going to find a way to make their cruise line safer for everyone. I think they're going to price themselves to such a degree that they will get travelers back. It'll take some time. Although I did just see, before we hopped on this call, I saw on one of my industry boards that someone booked an amazing cruise for $1,000 per person in a very high-end cabin on a very nice ship, and she was thrilled that she was able to book that for that particular client. Glad to see that people are booking it. I think it's more a matter of protocols have to be put in place. One note that I alluded to before is whether they're going to change ventilation systems, whether they're going to make improvements to the whole experience. And I think they also have to consider, in the event of something like this happening, how do we safely dock and get people off the ship rather than keep people on a ship docked somewhere where a problem just continues to grow. I don't think that's what any of us enjoyed watching, was the poor people stuck on a ship and they wanted to get off. So I think you'll see that the cruise lines will reinvent themselves. So I wouldn't count them out. I think they'll come back, but they'll be making changes.
Yeah. And both with cruise lines and airlines, I guess the next question is the cost. So you mentioned the $1,000 person, but if they're consolidating lesser routes, I mean, do we think the costs are going to go up or down for airlines and cruise ships? I kind of have this idea in my head that they'll want to entice people to come back to travel by lowering costs, but I don't know if that's, the reality.
Sorry, before we leave the cruise question, can I just comment on one other thing? Because I think something that's come up that's quite important is where cruise ships are going to. And I know for 2020, there's no cruise ships allowed into the Canadian Arctic. So these are the smaller boats, not the larger ones. But that has a big impact on the companies running those tours, because how are you sustainable without a year's worth of income? But there's also the reason why they don't want them to come, which is they don't have the medical facilities if people get sick. And I think that's something as a traveler, we have a responsibility to think about our actions. If we're taking the trip into some of these places where they don't have the medical facilities, and you arrive with a boat of 200 or 300 people, which is small by cruise standards, but still could overwhelm a total, a small community. Anyways, I just think that's important. The other side of the cruising equation that will have to be thought about, especially for, people wanting to go into more of the expedition cruising market.
Yeah, they've actually been told they can't cruise. I think it's 90 days before they're able to cruise, and then we'll see whether that date changes. And you're quite right. That's of primary concern, safety for those on board and impact to the destination that they're visiting. Yeah.
And I suspect that's true of any destination, really, is
absolutely.
Where you've got that healthcare support and everything.
We saw it in the Caribbean, when the ships were cruising around, if they arrived in port and there was someone, on board that had any type of respiratory illness, a respiratory illness that might have been nothing more than a cold, but there was no test to ensure that they knew whether they had it or they didn't. A lot of the countries erred on the side of caution and said, okay, we're not allowing your ship to dock at our island because we cannot have this impact on the locals that are living here. They don't have the facilities, to have that kind of an impact.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but to your question, will the prices go down for cruise lines? I'm almost positive that they will. They'll have to entice people back, no question in my mind. But does that extend to other routes? People that are flying within Canada. I think somebody asked something about flying within Canada. Will the prices go up or will they go down? Will prices change internationally? At this point, it's too soon to tell. It's always a supply-demand thing. So it'll depend on the supply and it'll depend on the demand. So if there isn't enough demand, then you'll see prices go down, right?
Yeah. I want to segue a little bit to travel insurance because it's become more of a topic as a result of this, obviously, and also some of our listeners have asked that question in terms of how travel insurance might change. And Nancy, I know this is an area you know well, but I'm not even sure if people were buying travel insurance, prior to this. Was it on the consideration list? And do you think it will be now? And if so, how will it change?
Well, if they didn't buy insurance, I sure as heck hope that this has changed their idea. I was a destination rep, and speaking as a destination rep, I can say, anything that happens at home can happen while you're away. Please, please, please do not travel without insurance. That's just ridiculous, especially now when the Canadian, government, Ontario certainly, will not allow you to claim anything while you're out of province. So I'm a huge proponent of buying insurance before you travel. I think what will happen now is that more people will purchase what we call CFAR insurance, cancel for any reason. We've started seeing tour operators offering that. When it got close to the date where the borders were closed before people were traveling, or when they were rebooking, they were already starting to purchase that type of insurance policy. And I heartily recommend, everyone contact their travel agent and do ask about insurance. I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm covered with, my home insurance, or I'm covered with my credit card insurance, but I definitely recommend that you sit down and you look at the differences between the insurances that are offered. But please, please, please do not travel without it.
Yeah, it's such a complex area, and I've always purchased it, but I think I sat in on a webinar a few weeks ago by the Society of American Travel Writers, which I'm a member of, and even then it was unclear what would it cover in terms of the pandemic or not. Like if you booked it before the date um, versus after, so it is a very complicated area, and I think um, we often think our credit card coverage will cover us, and that's really not the case. And I think I
Well,
agree, right?
it's not even so much whether it will cover you or not. Some of the insurances out there will require you to pay for your medical requirements while you're in destination, which may or may not be something that you want to do. Like if it's a couple of $100, that's fine. But if it's 20, 30, 50, 100,000, that's a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah.
So that's what you want to make sure of. You want to dot your I and cross your T to make sure that you are comfortable with accepting that responsibility when you're away. And one of I think we had a conversation about this too, Carolyn, was at the point when things were starting to change over and insurance, people would not necessarily have purchased cancel for any reason insurance, but there was an offer by a few insurance companies to purchase a rider that would bridge the difference. And that was something that a couple of companies did, and I know a lot of agents turned around and contacted their clients as a result, so that they could purchase that and have that rider on their policy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Now it'll be flat out. Mm-hmm.
Nancy, wasn't this also a different situation in that people who did have insurance were on the road and then were contacted by their insurance agent that they had to get home by a certain date or their coverage would cease? So it was kind of like a retroactive, we're going to cancel your trip while you're traveling. And that's something we haven't seen before, right, from insurance companies.
We haven't seen that before, but then everything about this situation is totally unprecedented. And, you know, one of the challenges I know that the retail travel community are dealing with is how things are changing day to day. You know, one of the difficult things for a travel agent right now is that they would have a client either in destination or one who was about to travel, and they were changing that particular reservation, being told by the tour operator, well, we'll do this for your client. And then, you know, perhaps not realizing the scope of how big this is, how it would impact people for such a period of time. Their policies were changing day by day.
Yeah.
So my heart goes out to extremely hard-working group of travel agents who were dealing with constant changes for every destination, every tour operator. And it wasn't like a booking was changing once, it was changing like 5 times. And they were dealing with the fallout from this because, you know, understandably, if you're a client and you're told one thing and you're saying, okay, I'm going to get all my money back. And then the next day someone calls you back and says, well, no, now you're going to get a future travel credit. Well, what do you mean? I thought I was getting my money back. Well, you know, the agent is often the bearer of bad news, but they're not the ones that set the policy. And so it's a difficult situation, a difficult road for all of them. And I can say flat out, travel agents have my admiration, my respect. They work so hard. So if you don't work with the travel agent, go work with the travel agent because they more than earn their dollars.
Thank you, Nancy.
No problem.
I wanted to just shift a little bit to this idea, and it's, I think, an idea Carol and I have talked about, which is making travel more intentional. And you know, we're going to have less choice probably in the short term, less options. So, and when we talk about values when we travel and the kinds of things that are important to us, Carol, how do you think people will be more, will they be more focused, more intentional? Is there an opportunity to think differently about the kinds of things that we're doing or the ways that we're traveling?
I think there's a real opportunity for that. I had a discussion with an environmental scientist a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that this was an opportunity for people to be more green with their travel choices. And I actually disagreed with him because I thought, historically, that's not, if you look at the information behind how people make their travel choices, the environment isn't usually the #1 choice. Like, it's usually around, you know, a destination. They want to go to the Caribbean, or they want to go on a safari in Africa, or whatever. That's not to say people set out with intentions to harm the environment. It's just that it's not usually, you know, one of the top things that they're choosing. And I don't see that changing, actually, even though we can see the impact our travel is having. You know, the skies are, you know, reduced to pollution, and we're seeing clearer waters. I think what's happening instead is that people are realizing, you know, that we are all connected. And if you look at the scale of the effort that has happened in the last, you know, 6 weeks, it's quite gobsmacking, you know, in terms of how countries, for the most part, have pulled together and scientists have shared information. And I think what I'd like to think will happen is, because we have all, to a certain extent, perhaps realized that we're not in control of our lives to the extent we maybe thought we were, that we're going to make our travel count, you know. And so when we make those trips, they're going to be much more precious to us, I think, than they were before. You know, there was a temptation. Something was easy. It was quick. You know, I know myself, I traveled maybe more than I wanted to sometimes because the opportunities were there. And I'm thinking very differently about those next trips. And I think a lot of other people will too. You know, it'll be you know, just like right now when you're buying your groceries, you know, if you're aware that there's a small store in your neighborhood that's struggling, you're trying to give them a little bit of business to keep them afloat. And I think this might trickle down into our travel choices, that you might see people choosing not only these regional destinations initially, but perhaps the smaller places that really need the help because they are a small business. Or I think we're going to see, and I think you saw it, Carolyn, in your research, people going back to places that they've been to. And I think some of that may be that loyalty, you know, you want to help them, you had a good time there and you want to make your money count. But I do really think that, like I say, people will be more intentional. And I think that's going to become, or come out of this whole fact that we've been forced to stop, many of us, and really think about, you know, what is our impact on the world and how do we want to count our lives, you know, like what do we want to have show from it, you know? And yeah, so anyways, I think it's an excellent opportunity for us to reshape how we make our travel choices, and some real good can come out of it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Rebecca, what are your thoughts? I know you love to do road trips and have all kinds of ideas about staying close to home. What would your advice be for people to get to know their local community and spend time kind of being a traveler at home?
Well, I think one of the things about road trips, it sort of goes into the whole value issue, is they present a very unique opportunity. And I had an opportunity to write a story about this and talk to some experts, on the psychology of road trips. And an interesting thing happens, I was told, and this is going to, we're going to want to talk a little more. I'm going to give you the example of my daughter and I if we go on a road trip. Well, now we've spent 6 weeks telling each other we're okay. And, oh yeah, I'm fine, and I'm fine. But you're not going to ask her, oh, how are you really doing? Because we want to keep the fear at this time. But first road trip, I want to throw her in the car. Here's what happens on road trips. And this can apply to couples who might have been a little too close and all of that for the last 6 weeks. But road trips, what happens is the driver and the passenger have the opportunity to talk in a way that they don't normally. Usually we sort of think to have a deep conversation, we have to stare into each other's eyes or pillow talk or that sort of thing. But what the psychologists say, I love this, is that people actually tend to be more honest and open when they have diversion. So I give you the driver and the passenger asks a question that you don't really want. You know, he or she may, just adjust the mirror there, check down, turn the heater on, the what. It gives this person time, and yet the other person is offended because, heavens, don't look at me and take your eyes off the road. They have an excuse. The person in the passenger seat, he or she, gets to sit there and sort of, you know, some question or some hot topic comes up. It's, you know, just sort of like, I'm gonna get some air, look at that bird or something like that. And it's these very distractions that bring out this comfort level so that you can see that. And you hear that about people on these road trips. So I think that a road trip gives us that opportunity, and you don't have to go across the country. A road trip can be a day trip. It can be a one-night destination. It can be something, it's so you can sort of dip your toes in waters close to home before you get, you know, your sea legs, as I said, and want to go abroad or something like that. So I just think it's a great opportunity. And I really hope that there was this sort of back to the, you know, the motels on the roadside and all that. I was making this great big resurgence and all of that. These are small companies. They've done some, you know, small businesses that have tried to, you know, turn some of these into some really and all of that. I'm just so hoping that that they can withstand it and that they'll be there for us. And everybody has their favorite stands where we stop, and it'll be lovely to go and have the whatever every I think person has the place that you have to stop and let the kids run wild, the place that you have to stop for your favorite hamburger, all of these kinds of nostalgic things that we're missing so much right now. And let's just hope that all those small businesses are able to carry on, so they're there for us when we can get on our cars. And, you know, let's hope gas stays this cheap. It'd be great, right? That's probably not likely, but anyway, yeah, I think there's a great
So to
opportunity
be clear,
to travel that way.
in terms of who you think people will take road trips with, because we've just been locked up with our partners for months. We may not want to take the road trip with our partner.
Okay, I live by myself. I will take a road trip with basically anyone. Okay, so it's okay. It's okay.
Or alone.
That's right. But I think no, I think that it'll be a great way for people to come together. And actually, road trips are really nice for multi-generational travel too, right? Because most people can do them. And again, it's I think we're looking for a lot of comfort, right? And a road trip can be very adventurous. I mean, it can be a lot of fun, and it has that flexibility. So, and I mean, obviously, we need safe cars. We need all of that kind of stuff. If you don't have whatever, I don't know, rent something that's a little bit, make sure you're in a safe thing and all of that, because some of those small gas station places that we're familiar with, they might not be open and all of that. So check your routes and the usual safeties.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with RV sales too. Maybe that's a road trip, but also in your own space. So you may feel more comfortable from a hygiene perspective to be in your own, moving hotel.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you are, you can kind of not be so pent off by going to the back of the RV, right? If all that stuff I said about psychology isn't true.
Yeah, I just want to ask our viewers on Facebook if they have any questions. We're getting a few here on Zoom, but if the Facebook crowd has any questions that they'd like to ask, we'd love to answer them. There was a question that came in today about luxury travel, and I'd be interested in the panel's opinion on that. Do we think we're going to see an increase in luxury trips, or higher just a different category altogether? But any thoughts there?
I think we're going to be poorer after this is over. So for some of us, it's not an option, but I think the fact that there may be discounts on it, I think Nancy, you could talk to that better than I can, but maybe there'll be more value for the person that can stretch a little bit into that luxury market.
Well, I think the luxury travel will always be there, because the people that have money probably still have money. It's always the middle class that seems to get hit the most, right? And I almost think that it might be the middle of the starred programs that may be impacted, because I think we'll still see travel to 5-star properties. I think we'll see some preferential rates. I think the rates will come down, definitely, to your point. They won't be, quite as high as they were. It'll take a long time to get pricing back to where it was. But to your point, the very first question was who was traveling. We said the young people are going to be traveling first. After that, it'll probably be the luxury travelers that will continue to travel to their tried and true destinations. So it all seems to come together, doesn't it? They may repeat to destinations that they've been to before, destinations where they feel safe. And if there's a deal on a higher priced property and their budgets allow it, I think they're going to go for it. But we'll have to see how the pricing structure shakes out when we get the tour operator programs and hotel rates set for the fall and into 2021.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting too, I think, and I'd love your thoughts on this from our panel is, will people be reluctant to travel solo? Will they want to travel more in groups or with tours, or, will that dynamic change too?
Personally, I think we're still going to see a lot of family travel. But Rebecca, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I travel solo a lot. I enjoy it and all of that. But having spent so much time with myself in the past while, I'm done with me. I think that, because a lot of times we travel solo because, we're perhaps too impatient to wait for the next person in their schedule, or we're this, we're that, and we're busy, and we're all of those kinds of things. Some of us just prefer it, and some of us just do it because, hey, you know, we want to get there. We might not wait. We might wait. We might now sort of say, oh, okay. I think there's a safety aspect. I can tell you that going back to the whole Cuba incident, Carolyn and Nancy, I had never met you before, and I was so glad you were there with me, and our friend and colleague Jane Muller as well, because it was scary, and it was sort of like, oh, I've got, you know, I've got these people, and we bonded, you know, very quickly. So, and I think that's not sort of lost, especially initially. So I think some solo travelers might sort of consider, hey, maybe for 1 or 2 times out, you know, let's go do it and have that kind of company.
I don't think I'd be afraid to travel on my own, but one of the things that we think we're going to see is an increase in villa travel. So, you know, to your point, you want to travel with your daughter, awesome. I think that there are going to be families that want to travel together. So grandparents with their children, with their grandchildren, and we've seen that as a burgeoning market anyway. I think we're going to see more of that, and it can be quite affordably done in terms of a villa. And you'll know that you're in a smaller environment. You know, you've got your own kitchen. You can clean to whatever degree you want it cleaned, or you can have someone do it for you. There's a lot more safety in having your own private area, perhaps, than going into you know, these big towered properties, right? So I do think we'll see that trend, right?
Well, so much of travel is the anticipation of doing it. And I know I have a map on my wall, and I'm researching all the places I want to go, and work on that every night just to keep myself motivated. So
and watch all the videos.
yeah,
There's some good virtual videos out there now.
Yeah,
there are. There's, I mean, virtual travel is a in a way a segment of travel that didn't exist a few months ago, and I mean, it was there, but now it's become kind of a bit of an antidote for the isolation that we're feeling, and not being able to travel. So so that gives me a little hope going forward that we'll continue to be inspired and stimulated by all kinds of things.
I think it's a good marketing gamut too for some of the properties that have done it. You know, it keeps you connected. I did a virtual Arctic cruise this week. You know, it was just 4 short videos, but there was one a day, you know, with the ice hotel, dog sledding, you know, all that sort of thing. And I thought, you know, it's a destination I maybe hadn't thought of going to, but it was one of those things. I was looking for something travel related to keep my spirits up. And I thought, I now know more about it. And I thought it's a really clever idea to, you know, get people, while they have time to focus on your product, to sort of look at it. Maybe you will add it to your list for later.
And there's a generosity of spirit, I think, that's coming too. I mean, there's cooking classes and dance classes, and, you know, all of these communities around the world sort of saying, yeah, but I can still teach you, you know, I'm still here, we're still here. And they're actually offering their expertise, and you can follow it along. And I mean, it's beautiful, really. Like it's nice the way that came out of this.
Yep.
That good came out of this, you know.
Yoga on the beach, Spotify lists of music to listen to. Yeah, it's been amazing.
I know there's been some questions that I've seen coming in around tour companies and tour operators, and I want to let folks know that we are planning another session to focus specifically on that with some tour operators and get their perspective. We also work with a lot of tour operators, so we've been convening them and kind of working together to figure out what some of the challenges are and how we within the JourneyWoman community can help each other. So I'm going to leave that for another session. I do want to mention that just as we close off here, we've got a few minutes left, and if there's any questions that we haven't answered or others, happy to have those sent to me at editor@journeywoman.com, and I'll be happy to get you the answers. And we'll post this and have other materials available from this call. But I think this has been a really great discussion in terms of, and the bottom line here is we don't have all the answers, but it's one of these unprecedented defining moments in history, and we're all trying to figure it out together. So I hope this gave people somewhere to start, and I want to thank these amazing women who are just a wealth of knowledge for taking time to do this, and all of their expertise generously for the JourneyWoman community. So thank you, Nancy, Rebecca, and Carol, very much for
Thank you.
Thank you for sending it out.
Pleasure. This is the fourth Facebook Live I've done in my life.
Awesome.
And they're getting more fun all the time. So I want to mention just quickly a couple things. In appreciation for all of you, we're actually announcing a partnership tomorrow for Earth Day with a group called Tree Sisters that is helping reforest the earth. And we all know that trees are the lungs of the earth. And so JourneyWoman is entering into a partnership with them, and we're going to be asking our JourneyWoman community to help us with that, simply by asking people to subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll plant a tree on your behalf. So I'm going to plant a few trees on your behalf for agreeing to do this panel with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And we have a few other sessions. We've shifted to very much an online world too. So we've been doing virtual events for the last 5 weeks, actually. And we have one tomorrow night for the people in Asia and Australia, if you're listening, to talk a bit about the website that we launched last week, and our thoughts around Take the First Step, which is a bit of the ethos of JourneyWoman. Would love you all to join us, or anyone in North America who missed the one last week. We had about 200 women on the phone. It was awesome, talking about all of our aspirations and hopes. We do every Friday a virtual circle where we all get together and talk in small groups about how we're feeling and what we're experiencing. So everything from grief to resilience to anticipation, and would love to have folks join us on that call. So every Friday at 10. And then on Sunday, we have Melissa Harris, one of our partners, who is going to talk about the calming influence of art and lead a discussion around art and creativity. So we're trying to come up with a lot of things that will help everybody get through this time and bring us together even closer. Even though JourneyWoman has been around for 30 years, this is, we're all kind of getting to know each other in a different way, and now becoming much more conscious about how we look on a screen. Life is
and your background.
Yes, and playing with virtual backgrounds. So anyways, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We will look forward to seeing you on some of our other sessions, and next Tuesday we have another one with solo travelers. So thanks everybody, have a great evening, and keep the questions coming, and maybe we'll do another one of these in a few weeks. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye, ladies.
Bye. Yep. Bye.